about what do you think are some of the best recommendations for remote workers? I think that this is something that many of us in the accounting space, we are virtual now. We have been pre-COVID. So, we were being asked by our clients, what do we do in order to get to a remote state? But that does also create some security risks. So again, I do feel like we have a chance as an industry to be some of the forward thinking and doing to provide insights to our clients. So Tammy, what do you recommend?
Yeah. Well, I touched on it a little bit in the last question about just being aware, right? Aware of your surroundings, aware of, let's say you're working from home, just be aware. I tell people a lot of times, if you're working in a certain area, maybe turn off the Alexa, turn off the Echo, right? All of those things are recording so that they can respond when you say their name. So do you really want them in your home office when you're talking to clients or speaking out loud? So being aware of, right, of what's in your surroundings, and then just sort of having some of those access controls and policies around remote work. If you don't have a written policy around working remotely, that would be something that would be good to put together, mostly so that you're protecting your company should something happen, right? And you're giving your employees those guidelines, all right, of what you expect, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. Things like, using secure communication channels, right? So using that VPN, possibly, if that makes sense for you. If you're sending sensitive data, either upload it into a secure sharing place like a box or a share file, or use encryption if you're sending it, over email. Again, provide that regular security training so people can start to become more mature in their cybersecurity knowledge. Really helping people to recognize what is sensitive data and how they should responsibly, handle someone else's data, right? Because you're being entrusted with a lot of important information, right? Things like, all their tax information, birth dates, money, like that's really important stuff that you're being entrusted with. So you have to make sure that they know how to handle it. Just sort of being able to recognize that suspicious behavior and be able to say something. Like you said, if you're seeing, some strange onslaught of targeted emails, I always say if somebody has inside information, they've probably been reading your mail. So, those are kinds of things to just recognize, be like, I got this email about this conversation. This person shouldn't know about that, just to be aware of that. And then, one of the things that Visory provides is, we do logging to a SIM. A SIM is a event log monitoring tool that helps to look for suspicious behavior. And so another thing that I recommend strongly is, providing company-owned devices. I know this is a little bit of a controversial, but my stance is that for the cost of buying a laptop, you as the business owner, now it's your property. You can manage it, with an IT provider. You can monitor it. You can have apps removed and things like that. Those are some things that's really hard to do when an employee owns the device and they're using it, for shopping and gaming and all kinds of other things. You want to really try to not mix those things. You should have a device for shopping and all the fun stuff, and then have a device that's just for work. So hopefully that's good, helpful advice.
Oh, yes. And we had sent out a questionnaire. And so that was one of our questions on there is how do you handle your team? And, some of them might be employees, some of them might be contractors, but it all comes down to their work environment. And the work environment has a lot to do with those devices. So it can be a phone, it can be a laptop, it can be a desktop machine. So you're hitting on that very next question, which is really about what should our industry have in place? And, you're talking about providing these devices, the things that are different there. You were talking about being able to have updates on the computer. You were talking about the apps. So, any more guidance that you can give us as far as how do we handle our workers that are coming on board and may or may not have their own devices?
Yeah. Yeah. And certainly, you know, there are things you can do even if you don't own the equipment. If it is something that an employee owns, you know, you still can work with your IT firm and say, you know, look, I would like to put some policies in place so that personal devices like phones and laptops, you know, they have to meet certain criteria in order for them to, say, connect to email or connect to the office network. You know, you may not have as many options as if the company owns the machine, right? But you can still say, I want to put these policies in place. And there's a lot of different things. You can require passwords. You can require, one of the things we like to require is that, like, for mobile phones, you know, they have to be phones that are running, you know, a relatively recent operating system, right? You don't want phones connecting that, you know, haven't updated in, you know, 2 years, right? Because the whole reason you apply firmware updates is to close security gaps. So, you know, there's some things that you can require. And those would be the things that I would say, you know, to just put in place what you can, whether it's a firm-owned device or an employee-owned device. And especially for those employee-owned devices, you know, have a written policy that kind of gives them guidelines, right? Like what they can do, what they can download, you know, that sort of thing. Because that written policy is what's going to protect you in the event of an incident if you have to go back to it.
And, you know, talking about the various different ways to work on devices, it even makes me think of in a phone situation, our firm, what our policy is that communication is coming through a phone app. So we're not actually ever texting directly to a client. Mm-hmm. It might feel like the client is being texted to, but it's happening through, you know, one of these apps that are out there. There's a ton of them. We've used Vonage, there's Grasshopper, there's a whole bunch of them that are virtual phone lines that you can have SMS. So the client feels as if you're texting with them, but you're not really. And that way the entire team can see the communication that's happening. I know there's a lot of really good apps that are out in that space. That are even accountant based. So lots of options in that area. But I think that you're hitting on a big one, which is going to continue to be an area that I think we're going to start to really, maybe as an accounting industry, pull ourselves together to say, how are we deploying devices to our employees? You know, best case scenario is a situation, I've got a new team member who's coming on board, I give them a device so that way it's got, like you said, the environment that I want them to work in. I know for sure that they're going to be able to have recent app updates. I know that the operating system on that device is going to be updated recently. So those are all things that are going to be more of a lockdown, secure environment. You know, that thing where I was talking about the C drive, if I've got devices that are being provided, I should be able to know with confidence. Yeah. Where if it's a employee or worker owned, contractor owned device, that's going to be a little more questionable. I'm going to have this show and tell scenario and just trust and cross my fingers, which doesn't really feel like the right answer in this particular industry.
Right. Right. I mean, I know it's an expense, but, you know, again, a lot of times what we tell people is, you know, for the cost of a laptop, you know, to give to somebody, it's, you know, it brings you that peace of mind that you're controlling it with the policies that you want to put on it, and just brings a little bit of peace of mind and helps you sleep at night. But I realize not everybody is in that position. But so if you do have people using their own devices, you know, work with your IT company and come up with some reasonable ways that you can assure it's running good antivirus and it's being patched and updated, those sorts of things.